In the middle of a raging Alaskan snowstorm, a desperate knock echoed through the night. On the porch stood a 6-year-old black girl, clutching her baby brother in her arms, both trembling from the cold. Their last hope was a man the town had forgotten, a veteran named Jack Carter and his loyal German shepherd Rex. What happened when he opened that door was something no one could have imagined. Before we begin, let us know which country you are watching from. If you believe no child should ever be left alone in the storm, subscribe now and join us for more powerful stories of courage and compassion. From our hearts to yours, may your day be filled with warmth and kindness. The night had swallowed Alaska in a storm so thick that even the tall spruce trees bent beneath the weight of snow, their branches snapping like brittle bones in the wind. The air was a white roar, the kind that buried roads, erased fences, and made every cabin feel like an island lost at sea. Inside one of those cabins, tucked at the edge of the wilderness, a single lamp glowed faintly through the frosted glass. It belonged to Jack Carter, a veteran of 42, a man built from muscle and silence, who had learned long ago that sometimes the only way to survive was to live apart. Jack had not always lived alone. Years of service had given him a scar along his jaw, a limp that appeared only when the cold cut too deep, and a heart trained to distrust both chaos and promises. When he left the military, he left with his only constant Rex, a 6-year-old German shepherd with a back as black as coal and legs of tawny strength. They had been discharged the same day, man and dog walking away from the battlefield together, the leash between them a tether stronger than memory. Rex bore his own marks, a faint scar along his foreleg where barbed wire had once torn skin, eyes of amber that never seemed to rest, ears that twitched at even the whisper of wind. In the small town nearby, people spoke of Jack with unease. He was polite but distant, a man who carried his groceries without speaking, who sat alone in the diner with a hat that read "Veteran" and eyes that looked through walls. Parents warned their children not to stare at him, neighbors nodded but rarely knocked. He was the kind of man who made people whisper strange when he walked by, not because he had done wrong, but because they did not understand the silence he carried. And so he had built his life in that cabin, chopping his own wood, mending his own clothes, living with only Rex for company. The storm that night had wrapped the world so tightly in white that even sound seemed to vanish. Jack sat at the rough-hewn table, mug of tea cooling in his hands, Rex lying close to the stove, his chest rising slow and steady, the faint shine of the collar tag reflecting the firelight. The kettle hissed as though it too was breathing. Outside, snow rattled against the wooden walls, and the roof groaned under the weight. Jack listened, as he always did, not with fear but with the instinct of a soldier who knew that silence often held secrets. It was then that the knock came. Not the gentle tap of a neighbor bringing bread, not the impatient rap of a tax collector, but a pounding so urgent it cut through the storm like a cry. 3 strikes, then 3 more, fists desperate against the heavy wood. Jack froze, mug halfway to his lips, the old familiar burn of instinct running down his spine. Rex's head shot up, ears rigid, body tense. A growl rose low in his chest, not wild but controlled, as if asking, "Friend or threat?" Jack set the mug down with deliberate care, the steam swirling in the dim air. He reached for the heavy flashlight, thumb running over the metal grooves, while his other hand brushed the dog's strong neck, grounding them both. "Easy," he whispered, though his eyes had sharpened to steel. Rex pressed closer, a soldier beside a soldier, waiting. Jack moved toward the door, each step measured, boots thudding softly against the floorboards, the sound swallowed by the storm outside. At the window, a thin sheet of frost had crept like lace, blurring the world. Jack rubbed a clear patch with the heel of his hand and leaned close, breath fogging the glass. At first he saw nothing but white fury, snow swirling in restless spirals. Then, through the veil, a small figure emerged, a child no taller than the porch rail, standing hunched with something bundled in her arms. His stomach tightened. He turned the flashlight beam downward, catching the pale, dirt-streaked face of a 6-year-old black girl. Her dark skin looked drained by the cold, her tangled hair frozen into stiff strands, her thin coat caked with mud and snow. She was clutching a bundle tighter than life itself. A baby, perhaps a year old. His cheeks bluish, eyes squeezed shut against the cold, tiny fingers, clawing at the air for warmth that was not there. The girl's lips moved soundlessly, her body shivering in violent waves, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and fragile hope. Behind them the storm towered, threatening to sweep them both away, and yet here they stood, knocking at the door of a man everyone else had chosen to forget. Rex growled again, louder this time, the sound vibrating in the air. He took a step toward the door, hackles bristling, his amber gaze fixed on the figures beyond. Jack felt the old tension coil inside him. The instinct to keep the door bolted, to trust no one, against the voice that whispered of duty, of compassion, of what it meant to be human. His mind calculated. 2 children, unarmed, freezing, minutes from death if left outside. And yet the soldier in him hesitated, remembering ambushes hidden in innocence, traps laid in the shape of need. The knock came again, weaker now, the girl's small fist barely able to strike. Her voice carried faintly, muffled by the wood and storm. Please. That single word, thin and breaking, pierced through the years of silence Jack had wrapped around himself. He glanced at Rex, who stood trembling, torn between defense and sympathy, the same conflict mirrored in amber eyes. Jack's hand rested on the bolt, his heart a drumbeat in the storm. He drew in a long breath, the kind that steadies a man at the edge of choice. He could leave the door closed, keep the world out, remain the forgotten veteran with only a dog for company. Or he could open it, let the cold rush in, let the children's fate bind with his, let compassion crack the shell of solitude he had carried for so long. Rex pressed against his leg, chest vibrating with a soft chuff, as if urging him, decide. Jack tightened his grip on the handle. The cabin seemed to hold its breath. The fire hissed, the roof moaned, the snow howled. Jack unlatched the small viewing slot and let a sliver of warmth escape into the night. Through that gap, the girl's eyes met his, dark, wide, desperate, but burning with the will to protect the tiny life in her arms. It was not a trap, it was not a trick, it was simply survival, raw and unguarded. And in that moment, Jack Carter felt the soldier within yield to the man he had almost forgotten he could be. The heavy wooden door slammed shut behind them with a thud that muffled the storm, cutting off the howl of the wind as if the cabin itself had swallowed the blizzard whole. For a moment the silence inside felt too fragile to touch, broken only by the hiss of the stove and the frantic breathing of 2 small children. Jack Carter stood in the entryway, his frame outlined by the orange glow of the fire, gray eyes fixed on the girl and the infant in her arms. The warmth hit them like a tide, the sudden change leaving the child swaying on her feet, her knees trembling beneath soaked boots. Jack moved quickly but without panic, a man used to emergencies where every gesture mattered. He lifted a wool blanket from the chair and wrapped it around the girl's shoulders, tucking the corners as though sealing her against the cold. Her skin was dark, lips pale with cold, eyes red-rimmed and shining with unshed tears. She pressed the baby closer, the bundle no heavier than a loaf of bread, but infinitely more fragile. The child gave a weak cry, so soft it seemed swallowed by the timber walls, and Jack felt his jaw tighten. "Sit," he said, his voice low but steady, pointing toward the worn armchair by the stove. The girl obeyed without question, her small body sinking into the cushion as though gravity itself had doubled. Jack crouched, tugging another blanket from the bench and laying it across her lap before reaching for the kettle. He poured steaming water into a chipped mug, dropping in a tea bag, and pressed it gently into her shaking hands. "Small sips," he instructed, steadying her fingers until the cup stopped rattling. Rex had not left the entryway until Jack gave the smallest nod. The German shepherd padded forward, his thick coat gleaming with melted snow, amber eyes sharp but not unkind. He lowered his body beside the baby, pressing his muscular frame against the child with a quiet patience that spoke of training and instinct. The infant stirred, cheeks warming slightly against the dog's fur, the rise and fall of Rex's chest a rhythm steadier than the storm. The sight made Jack's throat tighten, for it was easier to believe in the loyalty of animals than the compassion of people. The girl's voice, when it finally broke the silence, was thin and uneven. We were walking with Mama and Daddy. They said we had to get to town before the storm closed the road." Her words stumbled, caught between memory and fear. "The snow came too fast. We couldn't see. A police officer found us. He tried to help, said he would guide us through." She paused, her dark eyes clouding, tears streaking paths down her cheeks. "But the wind, It took everything. One moment they were with me, then they were gone, just gone. Jack listened without interruption, his face carved from stone, but his hands curling into fists against his thighs. The memory of countless missions came back to him, men lost in smoke, voices fading into radio static, the endless guilt of survival when others did not return. The girl swallowed hard, clutching the baby tighter. I kept walking. I had to. I thought, maybe someone would see a light. Her gaze lifted to him, desperate yet steady. That's when I saw your window. The kettle hissed louder, filling the silence that followed. Jack rose, poured another cup of tea, and set it within her reach. He saw now not just two lost children, but a test written by fate, one he had tried to avoid since the day he came back from war. To help them meant opening the door not only to the storm, but to the judgment of a town that already saw him as dangerous, unstable, a man unfit for trust. Yet to do nothing, to let them fade into the blizzard, would mean surrendering the last fragment of honor he still carried. Rex shifted closer to the baby, resting his massive head near the child's feet, ears twitching as though listening for threats even in the crackle of the fire. His body radiated heat, the kind that seeped through blankets and skin, the unspoken promise of protection. The girl noticed, her lips trembling into something that might have been a smile. "He's keeping him warm," she whispered. Jack's gaze followed hers, and in that quiet moment, the weight of decision pressed harder than any battlefield command. Jack sat back, the chair groaning beneath his frame. He rubbed a calloused hand over his face, eyes narrowing at the flames as they licked upward, each spark a reminder that life could be fragile, yet fierce. He thought of the neighbors who crossed the street when he passed, of the diner owner who served him last after all others, of the children pulled away by mothers who muttered about that man with the dog. To help these children meant proving every prejudice wrong, but it also meant stepping into a light he had avoided for years. The girl's voice, soft but resolute, drew him back. "Please, don't send us away." Her eyes met his, wide and unblinking, carrying the weight of someone who had already lost too much. Jack exhaled slowly, the sound heavy with years of solitude. He reached forward, adjusted the blanket around her shoulders, and let his hand linger just long enough for her to know he had made his choice. "You're safe here," he said, the words rough but true. Rex thumped his tail once against the floor, as if sealing the promise. The fire roared louder as Jack fed it fresh logs, filling the room with warmth. Outside, the storm raged on, indifferent to the fragile scene within. But inside that cabin, for the first time in years, Jack Carter felt the barrier between himself and the world begin to crack. The children's presence was more than an intrusion. It was a reminder that even a man marked by silence could still choose compassion, and in that choice lay the seed of redemption. Morning light came reluctantly, thin and gray, pushing through the cracks of frost that clung to the cabin windows. The storm had quieted but not ended, its voice now a low moan rather than a roar, like a beast pacing rather than striking. Inside, the fire still burned strong, casting a circle of warmth around the two children sleeping on the armchair beneath layered blankets. Rex lay close, his black and tan coat rising and falling with slow breaths, the baby pressed against his flank as though the dog himself were a hearth. Jack Carter sat at the table, silent, staring at the flames as if trying to read the choices he had made in their shifting tongues. The cabin smelled of wood smoke and boiled tea, a fragile peace in a world still half buried outside. Jack's body was at rest, but his mind was not. He could hear the girl's words repeating in his memory, parents lost to the storm, a policeman who had tried to guide them, then nothing but snow swallowing all direction. He had done what conscience demanded. He had sheltered them. Yet already he felt the pressure of consequence, of the unspoken law that said a man like him was not meant to be the savior of anyone. Rex stirred first, head lifting, ears pricking toward the door. Jack stiffened, watching the shepherd's muscles ripple into alertness. There had been no knock, no sound at first, only the faint change in the dog's breathing, the way his amber eyes narrowed to a point. Then it came, the deliberate rhythm of knuckles striking wood. Not frantic, not lost, but measured, steady, official. Jack's chair scraped back across the floor as he rose, shoulders rolling into the stance of a man who had faced strangers in worse places, He crossed to the door and opened the viewing slot, letting a sliver of daylight stab into the cabin. Through the gap stood a tall woman, wrapped in a heavy charcoal parka, the hood thrown back to reveal a face lean and sharp, pale green eyes that flicked restlessly across every detail. Strands of dark blonde hair streaked with silver clung damp against her temples, her breath rising in clouds. She looked to be in her late 30s, long-limbed and wiry, carrying herself with the composure of someone used to surviving where others faltered. "Name's Kara Jensen," she called, her voice steady despite the cold. "State Bureau of Investigation. I'm searching for 2 officers missing since last night." She shifted slightly, snow sliding from her coat as she held her gloved hands where he could see them. Her holstered sidearm rested against her hip, not drawn but obvious. "I saw smoke from your chimney. Figured someone was alive in here." Jack did not move the bolt, his hand tight against the wood. Suspicion flared faster than welcome. He had lived too long in silence to accept authority at face value. His gray eyes studied every detail. The exhaustion in her posture, the faint twitch in her jaw, the frost that had burned her cheeks raw. She was not here for him, but that did not make her safe. Behind him, the girl stirred at the sound of voices, blinking awake and clutching the baby closer. Her whisper was small but certain. "She's one of them. She was looking for us." Jack turned his head slightly, watching the fear and recognition mix across her young face. Kara's gaze followed, narrowing as she glimpsed the children in the firelight. For the first time, her expression cracked, relief breaking through her guarded features. "They're on my list," she said quickly, her tone firm. "The rescue dispatch put out their names hours ago. 2 children missing with their parents, last seen near the Western Ridge. When radio went dead, I was sent to track. I never expected—" She stopped herself, eyes locking on Jack's, the weight of gratitude and urgency colliding. "You've done what no one else could." Jack said nothing. Words did not come easily, and even less so when trust was asked of him. He studied her, the silence stretching between them like a drawn wire. It was Rex who moved, stepping forward until his muzzle brushed the cold air seeping through the slot. The shepherd sniffed, ears flicking, then gave a single huff. His tail swept once across the floorboards, not playful, not submissive, but a quiet signal learned through years together. Jack's grip on the bolt eased. He opened the door only enough to let her inside, the storm's breath curling around her frame as she stepped across the threshold. Kara stamped snow from her boots, her lean body straightening once she felt the cabin's warmth. She removed her gloves, revealing hands scarred from work, knuckles nicked and rough. The girl's eyes never left her, wary yet curious. Rex circled once, then pressed his head against Jack's leg, a sign of reassurance. Kara crouched briefly near the armchair, her pale eyes softening as she saw the baby bundled in layers of wool and fur. "You're safe now," she murmured, though her voice carried the authority of someone used to command. The girl leaned back but did not shrink away, her small hand tightening protectively around her brother. Kara looked up at Jack again. "They'll need medical care soon. You've kept them alive, but the storm's not done with us yet." Jack crossed his arms, still a silhouette of caution. "People don't come out here without reason," he said, voice low. "And reasons can get people killed." Kara met his stare, unflinching. "You're right. But I'm not here to take from you. I'm here because I was sent to find them." Her gaze flicked once toward Rex, who sat calm but watchful, amber eyes like embers in the firelight. "And if your dog trusts me, I'd be a fool not to take that as enough for now." The tension in the cabin thinned, but did not vanish. Jack knew too well how quickly appearances could twist, how kindness could be exploited. Yet seeing Rex relax, seeing the girl's shoulders ease at Kara's words, he felt the first fragile thread of trust binding the 3 of them. The fire crackled louder, snow hissed against the windows, and for the first time in years, Jack Carter realized that sometimes the bridge between suspicion and acceptance was not built by men at all, but by the steady loyalty of a dog who knew the truth before anyone else. The morning had barely broken when Jack Carter stepped out of the cabin to test the storm's edge, his boots sinking deep into drifts that reached his calves. The wind had eased from its furious howl to a biting whistle, sharp enough to steal breath, but it was the only window they would have. Kara Jensen stood beside him, her parka zipped high, pale green eyes fixed on the horizon as if measuring both distance and risk. Behind them, the children waited quietly, bundled in blankets and fear, while Rex paced near the sled Jack had dragged from the lean-to, his tail stiff with purpose, amber eyes alert. Jack's snowmobile coughed awake with the stubborn growl of an old machine, its red hood scarred but dependable, the wooden sled hitched firmly at the back. He laid heavy blankets inside, layering them to shield the children from the cold, then secured ropes along the sides for stability. Kara checked the straps twice, her hands quick and sure, her demeanor that of someone long used to preparing under pressure. When she finally looked up, her words cut through the wind. "If we delay, they won't make it." Jack only nodded, his silence heavier than any answer. The group set out into the vast white, the snowmobile grinding forward, the sled creaking behind, and Rex loping ahead like a living compass. His dark coat streaked against the snow, each step measured, ears twitching as he sniffed for signs of danger. The children huddled beneath the blankets, the girl's arms wrapped protectively around her baby brother, their eyes wide with both fear and fragile hope. Kara sat behind Jack, steadying herself against the sway of the machine, her gaze constantly sweeping the tree line as though shadows might emerge at any moment. For hours they battled the landscape. Snow whipped across the plains, blinding sheets that erased all sense of direction. Jack trusted Rex more than any map, following the shepherd's sudden halts and sharp turns. Twice Rex barked warnings, steering them wide around stretches where the ice rang hollow underfoot, hiding rivers that could have swallowed them whole. Each time Jack dismounted to test the ground with a stick, the wood broke through easily, confirming the dog's judgment. Kara watched in silence, her lips pressed tight, respect growing in the lines around her eyes. It was during one of these halts that Rex stopped dead, nose thrust into a drift, tail stiff like a flag frozen in wind. He barked once, sharp and insistent, then began digging furiously with his strong paws, snow flying in arcs. Jack was at his side in seconds, dropping to his knees, pushing with bare hands despite the sting of ice against skin. Kara rushed forward too, her breath sharp with alarm, while the girl's muffled cry rose from the sled. "What's he found?" The answer came in the form of fabric and navy sleeves stiff with frost, a human arm half buried. They dug faster, pulling snow aside until the outline of a man emerged. A police officer, by the look of the duty belt and radio frozen at his side, his face pale beneath a crust of ice. His eyes were shut, lips tinged blue, but a faint movement stirred in his chest. Jack pressed 2 fingers to the man's neck, leaning close. For a moment there was nothing but silence. Then the faintest pulse throbbed beneath his touch, weak but alive. "He's breathing," Jack muttered, his voice breaking the stillness. "Barely." Kara knelt beside them, pulling the officer's coat aside to reveal an insulated thermal jacket beneath, the only thing that had preserved his life against the storm. "These are the missing men," she whispered, recognition flashing in her eyes. Jack didn't wait for questions. Training took over, his hands moving with the precision of a soldier who had tended wounds under fire. He cleared the airway, checked the man's limbs, then began rubbing circulation back into frozen hands, pulling gauze and petroleum salve from the battered field kit he carried. His movements were brisk, efficient, the silence of a man who had done this too many times before. The officer stirred faintly, a groan slipping from cracked lips, his eyelids fluttering as he tried to focus. He looked to be in his early 30s, with short chestnut hair matted by frost, lean but hardened by service. Jack supported his head, forcing warm tea between the man's lips in careful sips until the shivering slowed. Kara steadied his shoulder, her face taut with concern but her voice calm. "You're safe now." "Hold on," the man's hazel eyes flicked open for only a second, confusion and gratitude battling in their depths, before exhaustion claimed him again. Jack wrapped him tightly in blankets, layering fabric against the freezing air, then secured him into the sled beside the children. The girl shifted closer, holding her brother tighter while glancing at the officer's face, her young eyes wide with both fear and sympathy. Rex sat nearby, his breath steaming, his body poised like a sentinel, guarding both the living and the fragile. Jack glanced at him, gave a single nod, and the dog's tail swept once against the snow, a silent acknowledgement of the bond between them. The snowmobile roared back to life, carrying them forward once more, but the weight of their mission had shifted. No longer were they only protecting children, they carried the life of a man whose badge symbolized the very society that had doubted Jack's worth. Kara looked at Jack, her voice barely audible above the wind. "You've saved him." Jack kept his eyes forward, his voice low but firm. "No one survives alone." The storm clawed at them, but inside that sled rode proof that even a man marked by suspicion could become the salvation others had prayed for. The snowmobile rumbled across the final ridge, its engine coughing but steady, as the sky began to clear in strips of pale blue. Hours had passed since Jack Carter and the others had left the cabin, and the storm that had threatened to erase them had finally spent its fury. Ahead, the low roofline of the rescue station appeared through the thinning veil of snow, smoke trailing upward in a thin column that promised warmth, safety, and the end of their perilous journey. The children stirred beneath their blankets at the sight, the girl's small hand clutching her baby brother as though the world itself had granted them reprieve. The rescue station was little more than a squat building of timber and steel, but to weary travelers, it might as well have been a cathedral. Kara Jensen dismounted first, her parka heavy with frost, her boots crunching against the packed snow as she waved to two medics rushing from the entrance. Jack followed, lifting the officer from the sled with careful strength, his broad frame hunched against the wind as he carried the man inside. Rex stayed close to the sled, nose brushing against the children, guiding them gently toward safety with a nudge of his muzzle and the steady confidence only a dog could provide. Inside, the air was heavy with heat and antiseptic. Medics moved quickly, taking the baby first into swaddling arms, pressing warm bottles and blankets around his frail frame. The girl, though trembling with exhaustion, refused to release her brother until reassured twice that he was safe. When she finally allowed herself to be seated, her lips parted into the first fragile smile Jack had seen. Across the room, the officer groaned faintly as another team checked his vitals, the warmth pulling him back from the edge of silence. Kara stood watch as each life was tended, her sharp features softened for once by relief. She turned to Jack, her voice low but clear. "They'll live because of you." Jack shifted uncomfortably, his hat pulled low, but she didn't let him slip away into silence. "And because of him," she added, glancing at Rex, who had settled by the girl's chair, massive body curled protectively at her feet, amber eyes half-lidded yet alert. The girl reached down with hesitant fingers, brushing them over the dog's ears, and Rex thumped his tail softly in reply. Moments later, Kara radioed back to headquarters, her words crisp but threaded with awe. She reported the rescued children, the officer found alive, and the man and dog responsible. Jack tried not to listen, busying himself by stacking his gear near the wall, but fragments carried to his ears. "Veteran, save them all, not the recluse they thought." He grimaced, uneasy at the idea of being spoken about, but when he looked up he saw the girl's eyes on him, filled with something he had not felt in years' trust. As the news spread through the small town, the narrative began to shift. Jack Carter, once the man people crossed the street to avoid, was now being spoken of as the one who had carried children out of the storm, the one who had dug a police officer from the snow when even nature had tried to bury him. It was not a change Jack had sought, but it was one he could not refuse. Even in the station, the staff whispered his name differently, no longer with suspicion, but with gratitude. Kara gathered the team in the main hall, her voice carrying the weight of authority and sincerity. "I want it on record," she said firmly, "that today we owe our lives to Jack Carter and his partner, Rex. Without their instincts, their courage, and their refusal to give up, these children and this officer would not be here." Heads nodded, eyes turned, and though Jack shifted uneasily under the attention, Rex stood tall beside him, chest broad, tail wagging once as though acknowledging the words were meant for both. The girl, still bundled in blankets, rose unsteadily from her chair and crossed the short distance to Jack. Her voice was small but unwavering as she said, "Thank you for saving us." She lifted her brother slightly, as if to show him the man who had brought them through the storm. Jack cleared his throat. Words caught somewhere behind the armor of years, but Rex stepped forward, pressing his head against the child's hand as though accepting gratitude on his behalf. The room warmed with quiet laughter, the kind that heals. Outside, the clouds broke at last, the sun spilling gold across the snowfields, painting them with light. Through the window, Jack watched it rise, the world glittering as though new. He stood apart, hands shoved deep in his coat pockets, but Kara joined him at the glass, her green eyes reflecting the dawn. "The storm's over," she said softly. Jack nodded once, then looked down at Rex, whose gaze was fixed forward, ears high, the very image of steadfast loyalty. In that moment, Jack realized the truth. They had not only survived the storm, they had stepped back into the world he thought had forgotten him. As the station settled into quiet, the final word belonged not to any report or headline, but to the presence of those who lived. The children safe, the officer alive, the team restored. Jack Carter, once a shadow at the edge of town, now stood in the light, not by seeking recognition, but by answering a knock at his door. And beside him, Rex, the silent guardian, had earned his place not as a dog people feared, but as the hero no one could deny. In the end, this story is not only about a storm or even about survival. It is about the quiet strength of those who rise above prejudice, who choose compassion when it would be easier to turn away, and who give of themselves without asking for recognition. Jack and Rex remind us that silent acts of courage can change lives and restore faith in humanity. If this story touched you, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and leave a comment with the thoughts in your heart. Subscribe to join us for more stories of hope and sacrifice, and may God bless you and keep you safe wherever you are watching from.